This time on PFD Auto, we're going to make a list of what it's going to take to get this on the road. So I've been hearing you guys. I see the comments and people want to see some action. I have done a couple of videos where we've gotten some things buttoned up, and this downhill slide has really got me inspired to get this car moving. So I made a list of things that I need to make this car move under its own power, something I could actually drive around. Now that's not tuning or dynoing or anything, but at least it would start and run. I could move it around in the driveway. And the first thing on that list is going to be our cooling system. So under cooling, I've got a few things, but first off, now my handwriting is terrible, but you'll get the idea and I'll explain it to you while I'm going too. The very first thing we need to do is figure out a radiator, and I think I'm gonna stay with the factory radiator. The reason I'm gonna stay with the factory radiator is I've got one. Also, I've been looking at the ones that have AN lines and they look terrible. The other big problem with those is there's no provision for AC, and I live in Central Texas. This car will have AC at one point, and I want to be able to retain that. So for now, we're going to clean it up. We're going to rinse it out. We're going to slam the old one back in there and just use rubber lines. I'm a little disappointed with that, but it also gives me something to upgrade in the future. And it gets us closer to driving. So first off, factory radiator. Next on the list, I just mentioned hoses. You can't get the coolant anywhere out of the radiator, into the block, any of that stuff without hoses. And since none of this is factory anything, I'm gonna have to figure out hoses. Probably gonna buy one of those things that puts the little edge on a piece of pipe and run as much hardline as I can, and we'll use silicone for the rest of it, hopefully. But honestly, I'm not quite sure. I did look it up, it's 2.5, kind of standard, so we'll just see what's out there and go from there. After that, we got to figure out the heater core. Nothing in this car runs on regular sized lines, and I'm assuming that is the same. So I found some adapters and things that I can run to rubber lines or AN lines. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do yet, but I am going to get those hooked up to the heater core, run into the engine bay, so we can kind of figure out the routing and what we're going to need to connect everything up. That said, we also need a fan shroud and fans. We're gonna have to do that before we get any lines run anywhere for electrical, because I need to know where that's gonna be. And I know I've been kind of keeping this secret, but you have to run coolant lines to a turbo also. And that's kind of the plan at this point. So that shouldn't be too hard. We'll just run AN for that. Just got to figure out where to get it from and where to put it to. That brings us to the end of cooling for now. The next up, oil. There's still a bunch of stuff to do with that. So under oil, I have a filter spacer that I need to install. And the reason I need to install that filter spacer is for the oil temp / pressure sensor. That, and I will also need a filter to put on there too. The other thing this spacer does for me is allows me to run an oil line out to the turbo. Besides that, all we really need to do is fill it with oil. Not a ton to do here. I'm sure there'll be some more stuff that I haven't thought of, but that takes care of our oiling system. After that, brakes. Probably the most important part of any car, and one that I don't take lightly. I replaced all of the rubber lines previously when I was working on this car in the past. So at least all of that's done. And the master cylinder doesn't leak. I'm fine with all of that. You saw I retained the ABS system. So what we need to do is we need a vacuum line for the booster. We also need to connect the master cylinder back to the brake pedal. We need to add the retention clips back for the lines that I took out when I pulled the engine. And we need to add fluid and bleed the brakes. And luckily, that's about it, I think, with the braking at this point. I would like to do a brake upgrade, but that's not in the cards currently. So we'll get to that once we realize that we've got too much power and not enough braking. On to the next one, transmission. There's still quite a bit to do with the transmission. Under the transmission, we still need the shifter spacer. Now I've got one 3D printed, I've got a 3D design, I just need to get it out to somebody who can mill one out of aluminum for me. So that one's still on the list. And with that, once I'm happy with where the shifter's at, we need to hook up the DSSR. That's a fancy word for the linkage that goes between the shifter and the BMW transmission. To get that, we need to measure it and weld it. It's a couple of pieces right now, 3 pieces to be exact. I've got a piece of steel and I've got 2 ends. We need to figure out the length, get those zapped together, then we can install that back in the car. Also, it's really brake fluid to fill up the clutch, but we don't have a clutch line for the master or the slave. So we need to hook up from the master to the pedal, from the pedal to the slave, and we got to create a line to do that. After we get that figured out, then it's just fluid, fill, and a new plug. Why the new plug? Well, because I have 2 of them and I'm going to use one. Drive shaft. Turns out when you put the wrong engine and transmission in the car, you also need a new drive shaft. This car came with a 2-piece drive shaft that utilizes rubber flex discs at the front and back connections to take up some of the stress from the torque of the engine shifting over. Now that is for the old 2.6 and the slush box that was in there. This also has a center carrier bearing since it's a 2-piece, and it's got independent rear suspension so it doesn't move up and down. Considering, do we go with a 1-piece? Do we go with the same 2-piece, a new carrier bearing and new flex discs? I also found a joint that connects to the BMW ZF transmission and comes out in a U-joint. So we need to decide route, and then we need to have made. That's not something that I'll be doing here. This car will get probably shipped off to a drive shaft specialist and we'll let them kind of decide what to do. We'll double check it and go from there. Next up is exhaust. As I mentioned, there's going to be a turbo, but there's no turbo without a turbo manifold. Now, just like I said with everything else on this car, it's got to be custom made. I've been looking around at some aftermarket ones and they might work, but the problem is I have very limited space. And if I buy some of these manifolds, I cannot return them. The one that I think might work is $1,400, and that's a lot of money to gamble. So I've been talking to my fab guy, and I think we've worked out that he can build one for about the same price. And then I know it'll fit. So we got to figure that one out, number one. Then when we're all done with that, we also need a downpipe. My plan is to connect the turbo to the original factory exhaust system. Now it goes from 2 into 1, so we'll chop it there. That's where we'll build our downpipe, and probably gonna run V-bands on that. The old system had the muffler cut out, so I know we don't have to have a muffler to run, but I would like to have a muffler on this car. I don't want it to be super loud. I know the turbo, it'll quiet it down some. This is kind of a sleeper build. I'm really not trying to make it look fancy or be really loud or have pops and bangs. Not really into that. So definitely want to add a muffler. Then turbo. I've been looking at a couple of different turbos. Now, a lot of people tell me I want to go really big. The reason being is that it'll spool later and I won't bend rods. But I'm not going for a ton of horsepower here. I'm thinking about 400 wheel, and I know that the stock rods will hold that with no problem. So long as I'm not going crazy with it, should be fine. I'm also gonna try to do boost by gear. That'll help a ton with that. The smaller turbo will get me a faster spool, and let's face it, light to light is about the most that you're gonna end up doing with your car. I don't wanna have to wait till 7,000 RPMs for it to go bananas and hit 100 miles an hour super fast. So choosing the turbo size is what's up next, and then buying a turbo. Since I've decided to do a turbo, there's a couple other things I need. Namely, one, you need an intercooler. You don't absolutely have to have an intercooler, but if you don't want to blow up your engine, it's a really good idea. Turbo air comes out very hot. You kind of want to cool that down before you shove it into the intake. I could probably get away with it if I ran very little boost, but then I wouldn't be hitting my horsepower numbers. So we need to figure out where we're going to stuff this intercooler. Then we can figure out the size and buy one of those also. So we're also going to need a blow-off valve and a wastegate. The blow-off valve, that's kind of a protection thing. The wastegate, that's definitely a protection thing. We don't want to overboost this engine because I don't want to buy another one. This is pretty easy. Once we figured out the size of the turbo, we'll be able to match our wastegate to that and kind of match the blow-off valve to that also. The other thing I'd like to get is a boost controller. Yeah, my handwriting is great. The reason I want to get a boost controller is like I was just talking about. We have the ability to do boost by gear. If I have a boost controller, I can ramp that turbo in a little bit slower at the bottom so we don't end up bending rods and having to get in a new engine. That's not where I want to be. So a little bit more money on a boost controller I think is ideal. Then we also have to consider the piping. There has to be intercooler piping and there has to be intake piping and a filter. And we have to stuff it under this engine bay somehow. So we have to figure out piping. The last one on the list and the most daunting, also the thing I pretty much have to do last because everything needs to be where it's going to be before I can start figuring out where to run wires. You guessed it, wiring. Now there's quite a few things for wiring. Very first thing we need to do is mount stuff. We need to mount the ECU. We need to mount the ABS unit. We need to mount the fuse box. And probably a few other things that I haven't thought of. But once we get everything in and those mounted, it'll make running the wires make a lot more sense. I really only want to cut them once. The other thing we need to do is figure out all of the sensors. So we need to run the engine harness to all of the sensors and back to the ECU. While we're figuring this out, and pretty much at the same time, we need to run power to things. So there needs to be a power harness. And that is things like the starter, the battery, fuse box, all kinds of things that need power, and they are going to be separate from the engine harness. A few other things that I need to figure out is backup light. Again, this was a Mercedes slush box and now a BMW ZF transmission. So I know there's a little plug on there, but how do I wire it into the system that when I put the car in reverse, my backup lights come on? Little things that I didn't think of until I started doing this project. I also need to finish my drive-by-wire pedal. Thinking about having a buddy 3D print one just to make it a little bit safer with a pin. Not real excited about the angle of the pedal currently, so I kind of want to change that, but I definitely need to wire it in since it's drive-by-wire. I'm hoping also I can get a gear position selector sensor of some sort. I'm not sure how that works. I know the ECU can handle it, and that's how I'm going to get boost by gear in my manual. So we got to figure that out too. And then comes the worst part. The part that I said I should have never touched, this inside wiring. The reason I bring up the inside wiring is we need to have ignition. That's important. We can't turn the car on. It's not going to do a whole lot. The other thing we need is a dash. Been thinking about going with the Haltech 10-inch dash. My only problem is how much it costs. I haven't been able to find a used one, and in all honesty, I don't know if I really want a used one. I'm gonna have to cut up my cluster to make it work and fit and look nice. So I really want to get the right one. $2,000 just seems like a lot. So that's still up in the air, but that is the one that fits best in the cluster from what I can tell. So we definitely need a dash. We want to be able to see how fast we're going and what RPM we're at, and if we have oil pressure, things like that. Wiring being probably the biggest hurdle. There's a couple of other little things that are going to get added to this list, like steering. Currently, we need to at least install the steering column. That's we kind of want to be able to turn. So yeah, I'm sure we're going to keep adding to this list. I could probably fill every window on this car with little things that need to get done. But this overall is a really good picture of what it's going to take to get this thing moving. So now we just need to start working on this list. Well, I know this was a short episode, but it's giving me a lot of clarity on what I need to buy, where I need to start, and what is really left to get this done. So I'm going to get at it, and that means it's the end of this episode. So if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. If you liked this content, short as it was, give it that thumbs up, maybe give it a share. If you have any questions, comments, you see some glaring things that I missed, go ahead and drop them down below. I'd love to hear from you. Any help I can get, I'll take. I mean, it's a new process for me, even though I've been doing it for almost 2 years now. Anyways, if you keep watching them, I'll keep making them, and we'll see you next time on PFD Auto.